Hello again. Here we are in topic 5. We're looking at how people can support student formation. I expect that we're all aware that interactions and relationships with other people are an essential part of us being formed as disciples of Jesus and being formed as ministers of the gospel. Remember, in our very first topic, we defined formation and we talked about this. We talked about how we are formed with and through other people. And so it's very important in online and distance learning contexts that we don't think about them as an isolated endeavour. We don't leave students by themselves just to struggle on through the course materials. We don't want our students to feel isolated and supported. However, we all know it can be challenging to develop connections and relationships in online contexts. So that's what this section is about, and is what the second part of the framework that we're using is about, the ACAD framework. The ACAD framework calls this aspect of learning design social structures, which is a bit of a funny term, but it's asking us to look at the sort of structures that support the social interactions that go on, the social context in which the learning and the formation happens. It encourages us to look at questions like, what kind of social environment do we want to foster in this course? Who are the people involved, and how will communication be facilitated? So just working quickly through those questions. What kind of social environment do we want to foster? We've already talked about this quite a lot during this course. We're looking to have a social context in which students can engage productively with others and with their course materials, that they can be supported and encouraged in their learning and formation. They can develop relational connections with other people and learn with and from others. That's sort of a broad overview. And what people might be involved as we take students on this journey of learning and formation? Well, when we start thinking about it, we realise there could be lots of ways that a range of people in different roles can be involved in students' online learning experience. We might have people who are mentors for students, who provide accountability, personal support, pastoral support, help students to work through theological questions and so on. We might have the more formal role of a supervisor who looks after a student who's engaged in actual ministry practice or in an internship and gives them feedback on that practice. Of course, there are always peers. Unless you're studying just a subject by yourself, there are usually other students that are in the subject with you. And peers can be really important in helping students on their learning and formational journey. And we need to encourage ways of collaborating and working with students working with one another. And of course, there's the teacher or the tutor or the lecturer or the facilitator or whatever you call them in your context. The person who is the main person presenting the material to the students. And that, of course, is a very important role as well. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that in a moment. Finally, the other kinds of people that might be involved in our students' formational journey are other staff at your institution or your Bible college. Students often have lots of connections with other academic staff or administrative staff, registrars, librarians, and so on, even when they're at a distance. Are those people visible to students? Do they know how to find them? Are they available? Are they helpful? Are they encouraging? And finally, there's the Christian community, the external Christian community in which the students who are studying our online courses are situated. And of course, there's going to be many of those because we have students from many different contexts usually. So let me just say a few things about some of those different kinds of people who might be involved in the students' online learning experience. Peers, as I mentioned before, can be very significant in helping students to learn and to grow. When students are connecting with their peers, they're connecting with people who are experiencing similar things to themselves. So that's that sense of going through something together, hopefully something good, not something bad, experiencing similar things together and being alongside each other. And in my research, I found that peers were often reported as having a big impact in terms of formation. So that suggests to us that we should include learning tasks and experiences in our online courses that enable students to interact and communicate with their peers. They might be things like online forum discussions or a live virtual sessions where people can talk together on Zoom or some other synchronous form of communication, setting collaborative and group tasks, or getting people to evaluate each other's work, whether that be written work or practical work. One thing we do in our online preaching course is we put people into little preaching workshop groups. They each upload a little mini sermon and then watch each other's sermons and give each other an evaluation using a template we provide for them. Those kinds of things are quite easy to do online. For peer interaction, we found that it's helpful to also have consistent groups over time if possible. Particularly for where students are thinking about quite personal questions or reflective questions, or where you want them to engage with something over a longer period. Having opportunities to engage with the same group of peers over time can result in better formation of connections and relationships between people. So what about teachers or tutors? I think it's essential that online learning is always facilitated by a teacher or a tutor. And the teacher can have an important formative role. They can encourage students to keep thinking about how they apply their learning, and they can be a model for students. They can intentionally model what it means to be a Christian following Jesus, to model Christian character, Christian scholarship, and one's own ongoing formation. And that can be really helpful and significant for students as they see that you're actually a real person who's seeking to grow in your own faith. Perhaps you can share something of your own journey or use personal examples as you're comfortable doing. Perhaps you might decide you want to pray with and for students in a variety of ways. And whether you're using pre-recorded videos or speaking in live virtual communication contexts, or whether you're using asynchronous text-based communication, there are ways of conveying that reality of who you are to students. Another aspect that it's really great to cultivate in online contexts is that sense of being present, so that students know that you're around, that you're interested in them, that you care for them. You cultivate this by doing things like responding to student questions promptly, showing interest, following up on students, providing helpful feedback, practicing clear communication. There's heaps of good practice advice already available out there about how to develop presence and communicate well online, so I'm not going to repeat all that here, but I've included some references in the course materials you can follow up. Like with peers, where possible, it's great to have consistency in teachers over time. So as we all know, the longer we spend time with each other, the better we get to know each other, the more comfortable we become with each other. And so students can become more comfortable with you as a teacher and more comfortable with their peers if they're able to spend more time consistently with the same person. What about mentors and supervisors? Well, setting up some kind of mentoring or supervision relationship is a commonly used means of formation in theological education. I'm not talking about anything new or different here. Mentors can provide accountability, support, a helpful sounding board, help students to engage in reflective practice, and so on. And when students are doing those practical internships or ministry experience, they need appropriate supervision from competent people. And those supervisors or mentors can provide feedback to students on how they're going in their ministry practice. So this means we might need to also think about how we can make sure that any mentors or supervisors that are involved with our students are appropriate people and have sufficient training to support students. We might need to train some of our mentors and supervisors in reflective practice or in how to encourage and support students. Perhaps we might need to remind people supervising that the student isn't working full-time in the church, they're doing their study and they only have a limited amount of time. There's a range of different things that we need to communicate to mentors and supervisors, and that's something that we need to think of as we think about how we're setting these sorts of things up. Finding and training mentors and supervisors for students in dispersed contexts can be a big challenge. But it can also be helpful for us as theological educators and as colleges to develop and maintain those good connections with people in those external contexts. It's helpful for the college and the students. As I've mentioned a few times already, part of thinking about how we form students is going to involve taking advantage of those real external contexts in which students live and minister. And so establishing and maintaining those connections with Christian communities and churches and other organisations outside of our colleges is part of that. So that's something for you to consider. As I mentioned earlier, I expect you're all in different roles, but perhaps that might be part of your role, and you can think about how you can involve other people outside your college in supporting students' formation. How might you be able to establish those ongoing connections between relevant organisations and individuals? What people or organisations are likely to be aligned with the kinds of things that you're wanting to do? What training or support might those people outside of your college need to support your students as they complete their study? The other thing we can try and do as well is to encourage students to create their own networks in external contexts, to encourage students to find a group of people to support them, to pray with them as they go through their study. We have another video related to this topic about connecting with external contexts and making partnerships with external organisations. In that video, Mwanga Salesi of Nehemiah Bible Institute shares with us his approach that the college takes to training students in their own contexts, and I hope you find that helpful. The third thing we need to think about when we're thinking about engaging people in our online courses is how we're going to facilitate communication between people. Communicating in online context is obviously different to communicating face-to-face. And there are many challenges, aren't there, particularly in asynchronous contexts, which people can often find disjointed or frustrating or a bit unreal. There are a number of ways that we can think about communicating in online contexts. I'm just going to mention a few of them here and a couple of recommendations for how to think about those. We've got the synchronous options, things like Zoom, Skype, the good old-fashioned phone call, or various other apps that enable us to engage with each other, to see or hear or see and hear each other in real time. And I've talked about a number of ways in which we can use those. Then we've got the asynchronous forms of communication. They're the ones where we communicate with each other, but we're separated in time when we do that. So they're things like the online forums or discussion boards, or email, or again, the good old-fashioned mail, writing letters. Of course, there's always a range of social media that we might want to employ. There are potential issues with using some social media apps. Some people aren't on some social media apps or might not want to engage in some social media apps. But in many contexts, we can use social media, whether it be Facebook or Instagram or whatever, to have communication with each other. Synchronicity can be really helpful, can't it, for developing relational connections. So having that sense of seeing and hearing each other can add something to our context. So if you're able to have synchronous sessions or record synchronous sessions, that can be helpful for people, but it's not always possible, and it's certainly not essential. And as we all know, after experiencing these COVID times, that synchronous forms of communication like Zoom are not without their problems, are they? So, whatever form of communication we choose to use, we need to ensure that we're clear about what form of communication that is and that we explain that to our students. So we're always going to meet together on Zoom on Mondays at 8 o'clock, or we're not going to be able to meet together synchronously, so our main form of communication will be via email and the online discussion forums, or whatever it is that you choose to use. Be clear so everyone knows where to go and what to use and whether they need to download any new apps or whatever. Try and make sure also that whatever you choose is accessible for all your students. So like I mentioned earlier, There might be problems for some students in accessing particular technologies or particular social media apps, so maybe you want to steer away from those. You'll have to work that out for your context. And of course, whatever you choose needs to be safe and secure as far as we're able to make it, so that people feel comfortable, so that they can share confidence with each other if they need to, so that they can be sure that what is said isn't being broadcast to the rest of the world. So keep those things in mind. Communicating online, of course, is not the same as communicating face-to-face and has its challenges. But it is possible, and there are lots of different ways we can communicate. I'm sure you can think of a number of different ways you could use to ensure students can communicate with the people they need to, whether that be their teachers, their peers, their mentors, their supervisors, or others. As teachers, we can always aim to be supportive and showing care and concern, and keeping modelling Christian discipleship in the way we communicate with our students.